I'd like to thank PTAC and the organizers of this forum for inviting us from the other side of the rocks, although the stuff that I'm talking about is mostly on this side of the rocks in the Northeast. And just to foster some cross-pollination across jurisdictions, let you know what it is we're doing in BC and our approach to boreal caribou management, and particularly industry's role in its management. I'm going to give a fairly broad overview of our approach. I find that in rooms like this, I don't get quite the strange looks when we start talking about the Research and Effectiveness Monitoring Board, the REMB. There's a lot of people who are now becoming familiar with this. Many of you heard me speak before on these issues. But just broadly, I think that there's still some work to do in getting the word out there and letting people know about some of the work that we've been doing. So the approach that we take in BC around boreal caribou management, I think, is a bit of a unique model, and it's really based on what I would call these pillars. First of all, that government industry are essentially equal partners in the implementation of BC's current boreal caribou implementation plan. And basically there's equal representation around some of the decision making on the investments that we're making. We feel that certainly change is best managed by having a small team. We're not a big group, but that's the way to get things done and reach consensus fairly quickly. And it's also very important to have funding certainty. So that gives us a bit of space to be able to plan and to be patient around our investments. We're not tied to government funding cycles. But at the same time, our work is time limited. So this shouldn't go on forever. Obviously, as time goes on, if this continues, there's always the risk that we'll start to lose our focus, and also the value or the cost of the information that we're collecting starts to go up. So that first mortality investigation of caribou by a wolf gives us a lot of information. The 75th or the 150th, a little less from the perspective of understanding predator-prey relationships. The other thing, too, is that we operate on the basis of having a clear management model that we use to guide our investments. So most of what we do is directed. We do have some calls for proposals, but for the most part, the majority of our funding has gone to directly address things that we see as major knowledge gaps, or to inform work around confirming relationships amongst the major variables that we feel are operating the system. Transparency is another important piece, so we'd like to make all of our information as available as possible. We have academic partners, obviously, we have to respect those relationships, but we want to be able to be as transparent as we can be around data to promote the innovation that we need. And then finally, some sort of commitment to change. So all of this information has to go someplace. There has to be some endpoint to what we're doing. And in our case, what we're working towards is a revised boreal caribou implementation plan for Northeast British Columbia. The government is committed to revisiting that plan, and they'll be starting their consultation on that piece next. So in terms of the board that I'm coordinating, we have equal membership of industry and government technical staff, and also representation by the regulator, the BC Oil and Gas Commission. She's here today. Actually, Lisa's on our team. The one thing, obviously, that is absent from this team is First Nations, although we do have a standing invitation. It's a little odd that we haven't been able to fill that to date, but we actually have good relationships, I would say, with the nations in the Northeast at an operational level. We have participation from the nations in most, if not all, of our projects. Our funding envelope is fairly small, but it's $2 million per year for 5 years, and it's derived from a levy on production and permitting in BC. We don't actually make the decisions. We make the decisions around where we're going to put our money, but we don't have final say over the money itself. That's actually done by a separate committee, and that's at a level of VPs and ADMs. Again, equal representation of both who make decisions around these funding approvals. And our banker is the BC Oil and Gas Innovation Society. So it was formerly the SCEC Fund, which was nominally operated within the BC Oil and Gas Commission. It has been recently spun off to be BC OGRIS, so a new organization with an equally inscrutable acronym. As I said, there's an arc to the work that we're doing. So we had the implementation plan signed in 2010. An MOU was signed between the BC government industry in 2011. Then we came on board in 2012, and we had revenue starting to flow. Our expenses obviously are lagging our revenues as our program has been ramping up, but we really see these three broad phases to the work we're doing. Learning is about addressing those knowledge gaps, testing the relationships. Adapting is making sure that our systems and processes are modified to accommodate that new information. And institutionalizing is making sure we're baking that into business in terms of regulatory requirements, practice requirements, so that the changes that we're recommending can be durable over the long term. And when I talk about our management model, what we're really doing is coming to some broad consensus about how we believe the system is structured. By reasoning from theory to data, we're not starting from null hypotheses. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of work that's been done around the Boreal Caribou system. There's a good basis for understanding how we think the world is operating, and it happens to be very important to come to some consensus on what that system is and the way it's operating, because if you don't have that, it's very difficult to prioritize where you're going to make your investments, to know where your biggest and most significant gaps are. And when you have this, you obviously have some testable consequences. So even where you don't have the data, you can at least take a guess at what you should be seeing when you encounter certain circumstances and how that system should respond to manipulations. So you can always be making your decisions on how you're managing or how you're investing based on the best available information. But at the same time, these are complex systems and we have to be humble. So as important as it is to follow the way we believe the system is working, we also have to be making investments in alternative hypotheses. So we're making our bets, but we're also hedging our bets. Our management model is very simple. Many of you have seen this before, basically following the basic flow from landscape condition through predator-prey, effects on population, caribou population dynamics. We consider this model to be causal, with the information, the arrows and the direction of these arrows encoding our causal assumptions, and also where there are no arrows, that also encodes causal assumptions. And all of those pieces need to be tested. We fully parameterize this based on available information in the literature and local information we have in terms of inventory. And what we find broadly is that the predictions of this management model in terms of our current conception of whether caribou should be going up or down and by how much broadly follows our observations for the herds that we have information on, including some Alberta herds. And so this obviously doesn't prove that this model is correct, but it fails to demonstrate that it's wrong. So that's pretty much where we are at this point. So I'm going to move from talking about that. So that's the broad concept. I'm going to move a bit from left to right in that diagram and talk about kind of the major pieces that we're undertaking in each one of these kind of components of the management model, and then talk about some of the things that are kind of the major themes that are emerging that I think we're going to be talking a lot more about over the next few years. And the first one, obviously, is understanding the condition of the land base. So we use the Ducks Unlimited wetland mapping as our base mapping. We have that now seamless throughout the entire area. We provided some funding to them to help complete that area. So that's what we use as our consistent baseline mapping. But as in most places, understanding what the state of the footprint is the challenge. And we don't have provincially available LiDAR in BC, and we have a study area covering about 10 million hectares. So and we have modest funding, so we're not going to chew up dollars per hectare trying to figure out what the state of the land base is. We need pennies per hectare. And one of the projects that has shown some promise is basically a spot 5 imaging process technique that, as you can see here, lights up the anthropogenic footprint and also early seral habitat, and also can help to indicate, you can start to see some gaps showing up, start to index regeneration on some of these features. So we can very quickly and cheaply get to the point where we can start to understand the extent of the footprint and how fast that might be changing, both up and down. And as I said, this is a pennies per hectare solution rather than a dollars per hectare. It's not perfect, but we did collect some on-the-ground information, some monitoring information that we can use to help calibrate this. And we're talking about rolling that out more broadly across the entire range in BC. The other piece on the landscape side, in connection with our park restoration project that I'll be talking about in a minute, is some low-level 360 photography from helicopters that the Golder team is here. They're our lead contractor on this restoration project, and they use this technique to classify regeneration on all of the linear features. They can tell you how labor-intensive it is to do this, but the product that we get out of this can be really helpful for operational planning. So as we move from the situation with the landscape more into where we are with the predator-prey system, Northeast BC is largely absent of white-tailed deer. It's essentially a moose-wolf system for now. So we haven't got a lot of white-tailed deer invasion. And so moose are obviously a big driver as we try to understand the predator-prey dynamics, and we feel there's a lot of space here to understand better the dynamics of moose and the interactions with anthropogenic footprint. I know we're going to be hearing about that today. From our perspective, we have a collaboration with the University of Northern British Columbia around this. We have a postdoc who's broadly looking at these three questions about understanding how the distribution and abundance of moose varies with anthropogenic footprint. We have 3 study areas where we have significant differences in the density of moose. We have probably a 10-fold difference in the density of moose from one end of our range to the other. So we have lots of opportunity to look at natural variation in moose density and also our anthropogenic footprint to understand how that's interacting in this broader predator-prey system to put caribou at risk. And then the other piece of that, obviously, is the wolves. And we've been monitoring wolves since Craig DeMar started his PhD in 07, 08. And we continue to collar and monitor wolf populations in the region. I'd say that this is probably the data set that is least utilized at the moment, but is going to be a very important component of the UNBC research. The other thing, too, is we had Rob Soroy and ABMI fly some wolf surveys in 3 of our ranges this year, and that provided some very interesting results. It was probably the first time they were testing some new techniques to try to completely enumerate wolves in some of the ranges, and had some success and a few surprising results that I'll get to. But that's the other component, is understanding the population densities of wolves that we have in some of these ranges to see if it lines up with what we would expect based on our moose populations and our caribou trends. And of course, we're continuing to collect the basic information on caribou. We maintain a sample of collared caribou equal to probably 10 to 20% of the adult female population across all of our ranges. As you saw from the timeline, we're only a few years into this. We've done 3 recruitment surveys. We've got 2 years of survival estimates. As in other areas, the caribou here are not doing particularly well, although how consistently badly those populations are doing is something that that's still coming into focus for us as we continue to collect this information. And I talked about hedging our bets. So we have another extensive project around health, being led by Brian Macbeth at the University of Calgary, understanding the role of health and also nutrition and condition. So we've had the cooks out collecting information on body condition. We have projects related to the potential impacts of climate change, kind of straight up habitat selection stuff, and also looking at population management options like maternity penning, captive breeding, etc. So always testing these things that are sitting outside the direct relationship with our management model, just so we have a bead on some of these other alternative hypotheses. I mentioned our Parker restoration project, and this is a small range. This just on my left here, on the far left, is the city of Fort Nelson. That's the Alaska Highway just to the north. This is a fairly small caribou range. It's about 800 square kilometers. But this project really represents the first time that there's been an attempt to systematically survey the current condition of a caribou range, propose restoration on a range-wide basis, and systematically treat that entire area. It's going to take several years to roll out, and we're still in the planning stages now, but we expect to start treatments next winter. As I said, Golder's lead contractor on this piece. We also have wildlife monitoring that's going on. So we have not only collared caribou and collared wolves in this area, but we've had Matrix Jonas Kimes here, and he's leading the wildlife monitoring portion of this. There's 88 cameras now deployed in this range, and we have a good sampling design here to understand overall use of the range and also pre and post wildlife use. So we're set up very well here, and we're really excited about this project. So I wanted to touch on 3 themes, I guess, that are kind of keeping me awake at night on some of these things, and things I think that we're going to be thinking about more in the coming years on this system. And the first one is broadly regarding this issue of the functional versus numerical response in the predator-prey system. So this is the idea is, are caribou dying more because we have more wolves because they have more to eat? Or are caribou dying because the wolves are more efficient because they can travel on these linear features and therefore kill caribou more frequently? And from the way the model that we have conceptualized, and again, based on the published relationships that we see, the evidence is certainly tilting towards that numerical response rather than the functional response, which some people may find to be a radical idea. I know that some people find it's a radical idea, particularly some editors of scientific journals that I'm currently in discussion with. Basically, that once you explain away the variation due to the numerical response, there's not a whole lot of room left on the functional side, and that we might, the functional piece could be playing a role, but it would be easily swamped by changes in the numerical abundance of prey. And I think that that's something that we need to give more thought about. Obviously, when we're working in the boreal, linear features are such a dominant part of the landscape. But if we think more broadly, I cut my teeth on southern mountain caribou, and we never ever considered linear features to be a contributing factor in the declines of caribou in these areas. It was all about forestry creating more moose and leading to more wolves, and we didn't need to necessarily invoke the issue around linear features to explain what was happening in our caribou populations. And of course, right next door in the mountain parks, we have crashing populations of caribou in places where we have intact habitat that is far more intact than we would ever even contemplate restoring to on the working land base. So I don't know why we continue to have a bit of a blind spot on some of this stuff, and it's even a bit of a blind spot in the Environment Canada's Southern Mountain recovery strategy that's out for review. So that's one thing that I think we're going to be doing some more thinking on that and testing some of that piece. The other piece is the importance of disease. So as I said, we've had Brian now working for, I don't know, it's probably close to 2 years now, maybe, I think, that he's been in residence at the U of C working on this. And we've fed him a lot of samples. I know he's plugged into a lot of Alberta projects too. And he has certainly found evidence that pathogens, bacteria, parasites, winter ticks, for instance, are all factors in this population that could be either leading directly to caribou mortalities or could be interacting with other factors to increase the probability of mortality. And we're at the stage now, I think, where we know these agents are in the system, that they're operating, that they may be responsible for some caribou deaths. But now the big question is, how do we integrate that information in understanding the risk to caribou? How do we integrate that piece around health and condition with what we know about the predator-prey system and the landscape dynamics to build a more comprehensive and cohesive understanding of what's going on? Brian's a smart guy, and we're trusting him to dig through this evidence and help us on that. And he's also got an ecology background, which is very helpful. But I'm going to be kind of doing this to him a bit. I'm going to see him this week, and we're going to be stuck in a snowstorm in Revelstoke, and so we're going to have some time together, and we're going to talk about this. And the third piece is this piece around wolf densities. And we found, as I said, we had this nice model, and it follows our predictions, and we just say, hey, we're golden. And then we send Soroya and the boys out to go count wolves, and they find a crap load more wolves than we expected them to find. And so, in fact, there were 4 times as many wolves in these 2 areas. So the calendar range is up by the NWT border. And then the Chinchaga, this is the BC portion of the northern portion of the BC side of the Chinchaga range. Basically, we had 4 times as many wolves in both of those ranges than we suspected. And this could be really disruptive if we start to think about it, because first of all, what this means is that to support that many wolves in, say, the Callender range, we would have to have 10 times as many moose as what we think are there right now. So were the wolf surveyors seeing double and the moose surveyors blind? I mean, if we believe the numbers, there's something going on. And what's this dark matter that is supporting this massive wolf population? And then on the other side, if the wolves are actually this numerous and this dense in these areas, there shouldn't be any caribou at all. They should have been crashed so badly that they're off the map if we go by, say, some of the rules of thumb we have around this, that if you have more than 6 wolves per 1,000 square kilometers, caribou golden, less, or if they're more than that, caribou screwed, less than that, caribou, it's all good. And if we follow that, there shouldn't be any caribou there. So either the published relationships are not holding in these areas, the surveys are really wrong, or there's something else going on. These are winter surveys that the wolves are being supported by some source that's significant and that we're missing. So again, it's sent us back to kind of scratching our heads, wondering exactly what's going on in the system. ABMI is flying surveys in southern NWT and also in Alberta ranges this year. So we're going to expand the sample size of and we're going to fly more in BC as well. So we'll have much more data at the end of this year. We'll find out whether or not this relationship holds, if we're actually seeing many more wolves than we expect, and whether or not that correlates to the general landscape conditions. So when we go into the NWT and we see a different industrial footprint, how does that affect the relationship that we're seeing? That's generally where we're going with that. Okay, I'm just going to finish up now with a plug for our website. This still says SCEC, but the website is bcogres.ca. It has archived versions of all the reports from all our completed and also our active projects. There's also links in there to all of our caribou telemetry data for all the herds, full attributes. And so, as I said, one of the important concepts that we have is around transparency, and we don't feel that we can serve the broader community properly if we are trying to play gatekeepers by picking winners and losers amongst those people who want to analyze our data. So it's out there. I encourage you to go there, download it, analyze it, tell us why we're wrong, tell us why we're right, but above all, innovate, and that's the important thing. Thanks very much.